So good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the inner transformation in the letters and life of Paul of Tarsus. And the reason why I chose this topic is we are constantly talking about inner transformation, and Paul is someone who we see this miraculous process of transformation in a lifetime. And sometimes it seems that it was an easy process, a process without struggles, when in fact it was a very difficult process, full of struggles, full of sacrifices. And so it's all in the book, Paul and Stephen. And what I did is I took some pieces of the book so we could see a little bit of his path from the old man, from Saul to Paul. So the transformation process, and also the original lecture has actually a lot more of his letters, some of his thoughts, some of his feelings, but for the purpose of our meeting today, I had to just leave a few of them. But it will be enough to give us an idea of his trajectory. So we're going to start with the old man, with Saul, and I took one paragraph from the very beginning of the book when he is speaking to a friend of his, and he says, "My main political ambition is to increase my prestige among the rabbis. We mustn't forget that Rome is powerful and that Athens is wise, and it is becoming more and more essential to awaken the eternal," how to say this? Hegemony? Hegemony. Anyone? American? Okay. All right. Of Jerusalem as a tabernacle of the one and only God. Thus we must see to it that Greeks and Romans bend their knees to the law of Moses. So, who was Saul of Tarsus? Saul of Tarsus was a man who was raised in a very rich and powerful family for his time. He was educated by the top masters of the time in Rome and in Greece. And he was raised to believe that his race was a superior race. So when we look at his personality and a little bit of who he was, he became a doctor of law, he was a rabbi, he was a very proud man. He had this very strong sense of superiority. He did believe that he held the truth. He knew what the truth was. And he was raised to compete and to win. And so that's who he was. And as we speak about him and the process of inner transformation in his life, it's important that we realize that we are not very different than who he was. That we all have in different proportions a little bit of these feelings, so that this does not become just another story about somebody else, but that we can relate to him and to his feelings. Don't we sometimes feel superior? If you are with someone who perhaps don't share the same ideas in spirituality, we immediately think that because we know what we know, we feel better, we feel higher. And not necessarily, right? And there is no better and higher. Everybody is divine, and we should seek to look at people in this way. But that's who he was. And it's very important that we understand who he was, because his transformation was remarkable. And we're going to see, that's the first slide, and if you go back to his statement, at the time, Jerusalem wasn't really anything compared, let's say, to Rome and to Athens. And yet, he felt that, it was necessary to impose the truth, to impose his belief system over these two other cities who were much greater and much more powerful than Jerusalem was at the time. So that's how arrogant Saul at the time was. And his way of doing things was always through force, if necessary. He wouldn't hesitate to use force to impose his idea on others. So the story goes on, and in this dialogue, his friend speaks to him about the Christians at the time, and speaks to him particularly about this one man named Stephen, who was at the time very well known for his talks, for his speeches, for his influence on the Christians at the time. So he's very curious, and he will tell his friends that he will do whatever is necessary to stop the Christians from basically insulting the law of Moses. And so he goes to a place where he knows Stephen will be speaking. This dialogue in the book is one of the highest points of the book, because Stephen was a very, very, very evolved spirit who was definitely a missionary of Jesus, working. His level of awareness and love was something still so far away from anything that we experience. So the entire dialogue is absolutely wonderful. But I did pick up this statement by Saul when he hears Stephen speaking, and at some point he will say, "Pious Galileans, where is the sense in this strange and absurd doctrine? How dare you proclaim the false supremacy of an obscure Nazarene over Moses right here in Jerusalem itself, where the destiny of the invincible tribes of Israel is being decided? Who was this Christ? Was he not a simple carpenter?" And what's really striking in this statement by Saul is that it shows this imbalance. When he speaks in these terms, was he not a simple carpenter? Really, really, the feeling that he had as he was listening to Stephen was of powerlessness. Stephen was so more evolved than Paul at that point. His arguments were filled with so much love that Saul felt like that he has nothing else to do or to say. So he was absolutely powerless facing Stephen in that dialogue. So when we feel powerless, what do? We try to minimize, we try to make the other look little. So he is this guy here, right, on the high end of the seesaw, right? So what he does is he diminishes Christ. So he says, wasn't he just a simple carpenter? But this is coming from him not having anything else to say. He can't really compete with Stephen in his high level of consciousness and love. When I read this, I thought to myself, okay, if this question was asked to me or to any one of you, what would you say? How would you respond? And so my idea was like, well, I probably would try to tell Saul truly who Jesus was. Maybe I would start by saying, have you heard that he's the governor of the planet? Have you heard that, even before the planet was formed, he was already a Christ? And perhaps what I would try to do is impose my own truth and my own belief system on the person who was asking me the question. Now let's see what a high spirit answers in a case like this. Was he not a simple carpenter? And the answer was, it is fortunate that the Messiah was a carpenter, for humankind will no longer be without shelter. In fact, he was the shelter of peace and hope. Never again will we wander aimlessly in the storms or in the wake of chimerical ideas of so many who live by calculation without the clarity of the sentiment. So there's nothing to say. I don't need to comment on this answer, right? It is so inspired, it is so above us. It's just so, so beautiful. But what we see then is these two ends of the spectrum. A man who is full of pride, at that time already full of hate, but also feeling powerlessness, with a man who was pure humility, pure love, and who held the true power. The true power that comes from being fully in line with love and with harmony and with peace. And so the story goes on. I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit of what happens after. He leaves that dialogue completely enraged, basically because he felt deeply humiliated by his dialogue with Stephen, and he starts what he became very famous for, which is the persecution and the killing of the Christians at the time, being Stephen, the first one who was stoned, who was killed in the circus. And after that, he was actually engaged to Abigail, who was Stephen's sister. But Paul didn't know at that point. And then when Stephen is dying and Abigail recognizes that Stephen is her brother who had changed names, then she tells him, Paul, but this is my brother. And he's like, but, it can't be. Yes, he is. And Stephen dies, forgiving Paul at that very moment. But Paul is unable to continue his engagement with Abigail. So he breaks up, says, listen, I cannot continue to be with you if you are Stephen's sister. And he goes on his life in the persecution of Christians. But one day, he misses her so deeply that he decides to put his pride aside and go look for her. But when he finds her, she is about to die. She's very ill and she's completely transformed. Now she's a Christian herself. She has spent part of her life at that point with a man named Ananias, who was a Christian and who has taught her about Christianity, and she fully converted. So she's very happy to see him, and she tells him in that moment that Christ was so good that allowed him to come to see her and to speak to her before she died. And that Stephen has shown up to her and has told her that her time to go was coming, and that both of them would continue to assist him in his work the day that he would convert to Christianity. There was another chance that he was given to start the process of inner transformation. But what happened? He was unable to listen to that invitation, and then he decided to go after Ananias. So he displays his powerlessness into Ananias and went to look for him in Damascus in order to take him to prison and eventually kill him. So he goes to Damascus after Ananias, and that is then when he's going to meet Jesus in the very well-known passage in the gospel where he is in the road to Damascus and Jesus appears to him. But it's worthwhile to read the description of the Spirit Emmanuel in the book Paul and Stephen. So it goes like this. He finds himself enveloped by a light different than that of the sun. His vision seems to have extended to the infinite. Another light bathes his dazzled eyes on the path which the rent atmosphere has unveiled to him, he sees the figure of a man of majestic beauty, giving the impression that he is coming down out of heaven to meet him. His robe is made of luminous points of light. His magnetic eyes, full of sympathy and love, illuminate the grave but gentle face haloed by divine sorrow. Saul of Tarsus contemplates him in profound wonder. And it is then, with the intonation of an unforgettable voice, that the unknown figure makes himself heard. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? The young man from Tarsus did not realize that instinctively he was on his knees. Unable to grasp what was happening, he pressed his heart in a gesture of desperation. An irrepressible sentiment of adoration had overtaken him completely. What could this mean? Who was the divine figure he was beholding framed against the open firmament, and whose presence was flooding his heart with unknown emotions? Saul asked in a trembling and fearful voice, "Who are you, Lord?" Haloed by a balsamic light and in a tone of inconceivable tenderness, the Lord responded, "I am Jesus." And then Emmanuel will continue the narrative by speaking about this process of death, basically, death of the old man. Because everything that he had believed up to this point, his entire life, the foundation of his life up to that moment, pretty much is gone. So as he listened to Jesus, Emmanuel described that he bends to the ground, he starts into a convulsive weeping, he feels like a mortal blow to his soul. He realized that all his principles are destroyed in this moment. The main feeling is of deep shame, and his spirit is completely lacerated. And we do feel sometimes like that. I mean, there are moments in our lives where the light strikes us, so to speak, and we wonder about what have we been doing and how have we been walking up to this point. And a lot of times, many things that we used to believe, values that we used to hold, they kind of become meaningless. And it is a moment of pain. It is a moment of suffering. And it is a moment of death. In our life, sometimes it doesn't happen like so powerful, in such a powerful way, but in small amounts. But it does happen. If we pay attention, we'll realize that. And this is important, because for something to be born, it's necessary sometimes that something dies, so the renewal process can take place. And then dealing with all those feelings, I really like this description of Emmanuel, because it speaks about the grandiosity of God's love and Jesus' love. And he realizes that. So he says, in a flash, the young rabbi considered the extent of the gesture of love. The tears gushed from his embittered heart like pure lymph from an unknown fount. Right there in the august sanctuary of his spirit, he made a vow to give himself to Jesus forever. Who is this man that took time to come from heaven, where he is, to meet me? A man who has been persecuting and killing all who believe him and love him. And he leaves the spheres where he lives to meet me on a road to Damascus. That's what Paul was thinking. Who is this man? So he understands the extent of his love, which is the love that he feels towards each one of us. And that's the message. The message is that we are all worth this love. We are all worth this attention, this level of care. And Jesus is not going to show up in the roads of Damascus, but the roads of North Miami, and in Miami in general, to us in different ways, in different moments, with different calls, to people, to others, precisely giving us the opportunity to take a different path. So he becomes the new servant. At that moment, he makes a resolution that speaks to the level of humility and the grandiosity of the moment that he embraced. And so his attitude And I always say that when people come to me and they want to talk to me and they are immersed in deep guilt and shame, and then what we try to tell them is, okay, I mean, you realize that what you've done is not the best for you, but now what? You can choose to stay in this place of guilt and shame, or you can choose to change your life and to write a new story and to build a positive karma from this point on. And this is precisely what he does. Had he stayed stuck in guilt and shame, perhaps Jesus would need to send somebody else to do the work that he did. But he simply asked Jesus at that moment, Lord, what would you have me do? He didn't say, would you like me to go and do this or that? He didn't choose what to do. He just said, I'm here, I'm your servant. Just, what you want me to do, I will do it. And so, in this process of inner transformation, that's a very, very crucial point to each one of us. Because on a daily basis, we realize that we have done things that perhaps are not the best. But what we're invited to do is to ask, dear Lord, what would you like me to do from now on? And move forward. And in the resolution process comes an action. Because it's okay to say, all right, I realize that what I have done is not good. I repent. And I want to change. But it can't be just a thought or words. It needs to be translated into actions. So he will say, I need to enter an active phase of work to undo my guilty past. It is true that I caused great harm to Jesus' church in Jerusalem. But if Jesus' mercifulness extend my time here on earth, I will use all my time to take the loving and peaceful message of this house to all parts of the world, which he did for sure, right? So not only he said that he would, but then he took all his energy and all his time in the same lifetime. Sometimes people ask me, do we need to wait for the next lifetime? No. You can change now, in this lifetime, today, your path, by actively working. So we need to take whatever we have. Each one of us here is very wealthy. We have healthy bodies, we have healthy minds, we have hands, we have feelings. We have so much to offer. How much are we utilizing of our resources and the blessings that we are given every day to give? And then we get a little bit into the letters, and part of the process of inner transformation is making choices, and making choices is not easy, but that's the process. Luis was talking about dichotomy last week in a very nice lecture, and that's the process. We need to know, and we know within ourselves darkness and light, and each moment we're inviting to make a choice. That's the exercise of inner transformation. And so to Corinthians, he will say, I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. So that's an interesting statement, because he's saying, like, everything is okay, everything is available to me. But not everything that's available to me serves me. Awareness, understanding. And then sometimes I might still want to do something that not serves me, but I will have then to choose not to do it. And Luis also was talking about this last week, where the duality ends when we transcend. So it comes to a point in this process and in this exercise that we will not need to choose, we will have transcended. Right? So that's the goal. But in the meantime, we have to choose. And a lot of times it will be this war. I know what serves me or what not serves me, but I still want to do what does not serve me. And then until we understand why we want to do that, we can use outside tools such as discipline to say to ourselves, one day I'm going to understand why I still want to act this way, and that's a deeper process of looking within. But then we can use tools such as discipline to say, I know this is not going to be good for me, and I'm going to abstain from doing it. In the Spirit's book, question 640, Kardec asked the Spirit, is it as bad to desire to do wrong as it is to do it? That depends on the specific case. If you voluntarily resist the desire to do wrong, especially when there is a good possibility of fulfilling that desire, you are acting with integrity. But if your reason from not doing something wrong is the lack of opportunity, you are as guilty as if you have done it. So ideally, what we want is to not even have the desires. But until then, what the spirits will tell us, and they will tell us in other questions as well, is that there is a lot of merit when you still want to go in the wrong way. I still want to get into the argument. I still want to, whatever. And you refrain from doing that. There is a lot of merit, a lot of virtue in just trying to refrain from it. Okay, so to Romans, he will say, that's also a very well-known statement by Saul. It says, for the good that I would, I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. He's speaking about his struggle. So the good that he wants to do, he doesn't do. And the evil that he does not want to do, he still does. So which shows that, his struggles are really not different than ours. I mean, that's our daily lives, no? I mean, so much of our lives still are in this way. And to Philippines, he's going to talk about his source of strength. So he had his struggles, he had these difficulties, but he will say, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. So in Spiritism, we like to think of Jesus not as an outer savior, someone who's going to bring salvation. He is the reference for the inner process of salvation, the inner process of transformation. But he is an outer reference, where in the moments of frailty, we can reach out to him as a reference, to him as a source of strength. And that's our movement of faith. Leon Denis has a chapter in a book called Life and Destiny about will. And it's so beautiful, because will is a very important tool in the process of inner transformation. And so he will say, I just took this one paragraph. What is important above all is to know that we can realize all things in the psychic domain. No force remains sterile when it is exercised constantly with an aim conforming to right and justice. This is the case with the will. It can act equally sleepy or waking for the valiant soul which has what?
Fire.
Yeah, its aim pursues it with tenacity in one as in the other phase of life, and so determines a powerful current which silently undermines obstacles. So he's talking about the power of will. When you want something, and you really want something, the problem is that sometimes we say, I want this. I want to be better in this way, but there is still a side of us who truly does not. And so part of the process is to continue to nurture the will in the right direction. And it can be powerful that even when we're sleeping, that will is still acting. It's still acting and transforming and generating the circumstances, appropriate circumstances for the transformation to take place. So discipline and will, two tools important for this journey. But again, he had his moments of frailty. the journey was not always easy. So there's one moment in the book where he goes back to his father's house. He wants to reconnect with his father. He wants to be with his loved ones, with his family. And so he goes back and he's received by his father with contempt. And he's very disappointed. He's very sad. Beyond that, he's very devastated. And so he starts to cry and he falls asleep. Once he falls asleep, he actually sees himself outside of his body. And when he looks up, he sees this light coming from the sky. And Stephen and Abigail are coming together towards him. And that's another part of the book that is just outstanding. Difficult to read without crying, like many other parts of the book, right? So if you're going to read Paul and Stephen, make sure you have your tissue box next to you. I guarantee you will cry. And so he is feeling so devastated, and he sleeps, he's out of the body, and he sees Stephen, who he had killed, and Abigail coming towards him. And he feels so much shame in that moment. And all he wants to do is grab Stephen's feet, kneel on his feet, and ask for forgiveness. And Stephen will say to him in that moment, "Saul, do not stay stuck in the past. Who in the world is exempt from wrongdoings? Only Jesus was sinless." So I think that's also such a beautiful statement. Because sometimes we are so tough on ourselves. Sometimes we beat ourselves up so much, you know. And he gives us the reference here. Only Jesus was sinless. He was the only pure spirit. We all growing. We all children. And so we have, I always say that part of suffering less as we go through the process of inner transformation is actually coming to full acceptance of our humanity. Because a lot of times when we commit a mistake and we suffer extremely, it's because we wish we were more than we are. Not essentially, but in the process of growth. And we are where we need to be. We are where we have arrived. And that's the place where we are. And that's okay. As long as we are moving forward. And everybody's moving forward. Even the ones that don't want to move forward are moving forward without knowing. Because that's what God wants. And so we don't have a say in this process. We are moving forward. And then he looks at Abigail, and then the man speaks in him because he starts to think about, oh my God, look, I lost this woman, her love, the ability of having a home, the ability of having a family. She would be a wonderful partner, a wonderful and loving mother to my kids. As he thinks about that, she will say to him, "We shall never lack a home. Our home shall be in the hearts of those who come our way. As for children, we have the immense family that Jesus had bequeathed us in His mercy. The children of the Calvary are our children too. They are everywhere, awaiting the inheritance from the Savior." What I like about this statement is the fact that she broadens his view about what family is truly about. Which I think is good for every time I'm speaking to people who are from other countries. Sometimes we feel like, oh, I miss so much my family. And Jesus said at one point, who is your mother? Who is your son? Who is your mother? We have mothers in temporary roles. My mother is my mother in this life, but she's just a spirit who was given the role of being my mother in this lifetime. Who was she in my past life? Who will she be in my next life? So our family is everybody. Each one of you is part of my family. And so we should think these ways. If we can be given the happiness, the joy of having a family, a mom, but if we don't, there's so many people who want to have a father, a mother, a son, a sister, and we limit ourselves to the narrowest, range of the blood families when there's so much loneliness and so much need in this world. When I used to work with the elderly before I moved to the university, a lot of times I would say to them, I miss my grandmother so much. You want to be my grandmother? And they always say yes. And so it was just, you know. But I actually meant, and they felt always like happy with that. But that's the idea, right? It's like we can make each other our family. Okay, so moving on with the book. Again, he went through a lot of adversity. And one of the things in the process of inner transformation is obedience. You know, I'm struggling with my kids, right, in trying to get them to be obedient. And then, how obedient are we under God? A lot of times we are just like little children when we say, I just don't want to do it this way. And let's see what he says. You must be faithful to God. Even if the whole world were to turn against you, you would still have, this is actually Abigail talking to him, you would still have the boundless treasure of a faithful heart. The triumph peace of Christ lies in the industrious souls that obeys and trust him. Once you have exhausted the last drop of Posca, which is a drink of earthly disappointments, Jesus will fill your spirit with immortal light. So even when everything turns against us, when all the difficulties appear in our way, it's not up to us to judge others. It's up to us to keep doing what we're supposed to do, what we've been called to do, because the others are going to respond to their own conscience one day. At the very end of the day, nobody's going to ask us about someone else. Our conscience is only going to ask ourselves, how did you do? And again, it's not God, it's in us. We know that as we finish our lives, one of the processes that happen is the revision of our life. We go back naturally. This revision of the life in the moment of death helps us to prepare for the future. It happens when we incarnate as well, so we can prepare to a new life. So we always doing these revisions, going back to prepare for the next moment. And so the dialogue continues between the brothers and Paul, and they will give him, and that's an entire dialogue there, these tools for the path. To give always. Most of us seek to receive. And we're going to find that the more we give, the more love we're going to feel within ourselves. And we're going to become, like Louis was saying last week, the own source of the love that we are seeking. So give love, wait, we have to be patient because the transformation is not a miraculous process. Work and forgive. Coming on to the end, we're going to see a little bit of his struggles. Paul kept himself strong and above the least frictions. There were annoyances, adversities in the public square, unjust accusations, cruel slanders. Powerful threats sometimes fell on them unexpectedly, but the brave apostle of the Lord continued serene and firm through the storms. It was essential for Jesus to triumph in people's hearts. So right here was not even about him anymore. He entered a phase of his transformation where it was not about what he wanted. The focus was the gospel of Jesus should triumph, should be the focus. And so when you get to this point, you know that your level of awareness is truly changing. And here is a point of like highest consciousness. This passage is a very, very beautiful passage where he's actually being taken to prison, and he's going to die. He asked to be taken to Rome. He does not want to die in the same place of Jesus. And so he's saying goodbye to all his friends. All the people gather around him. The children, the elderly, James, who he had a lot of friction, comes to say goodbye to him. And Luke, who is observing all that movement, he is deeply moved by it. And the little children call him Father. He himself has a moment of consciousness where he realizes that before he was seeing us the persecutor, and he has done the work to a point that now for the first time in his life he was being called Father, and he could feel the love coming from the people. So he was aware of the shift in how he was perceived. And so Luke, observing the whole scene and his emotions, he says, I'm going to write about this. And Paul will reply to him, no, Luke, do not write about virtues that I do not possess. If you love me, you must not expose my name to erroneous judgments. You must speak instead of the persecutions that I carried out against the followers of the Holy Gospel. Keep silent about the considerations and the favors we have received in our endeavor, because their garland belonged to Jesus alone. It was Him who lifted us out of our anguishing misery to fill our emptiness. It was His hand that charitably took us and redirected us to the holy way. These joys and divine emotions belong to Him. Therefore, let us not have the least concern about relating episodes that would leave a door open to vanity. Now remember the first slide where he's talking about bending the knees of others to impose the truth? And now in this statement he's saying, don't speak about virtues that I do not have. All the strength comes from above. It does not belong to me. What I do because I am with Him. He is with me. He is the source. And then let's not talk about ourselves, because it's His work. It's His kindness. In the moments that we don't have anything else to give, He comes. He provides. He sustains. He is the nourishment. So a complete transformation from thinking of Himself as the source of the truth to understanding that all the power came from the higher love that He was attuned to in that moment. And so he's taken to prison, and there is a dialogue at the very end of the book where it's going to show that not only he had transformed, but his consciousness about real life. We are spirits, we believe in the immortality of the soul, we believe that we're mortal beings, and yet this consciousness is kind of present in our lives. More and more, I hope. But in that moment, he was so fully aware of his immortality that he was able to speak to the man who was going to cut his head off in these terms. Do not think that your sword can end my life, since living these fleeting minutes in a carnal body means that I shall enter without delay into the tabernacles of life eternal with my Lord Jesus Christ. I'm not worth of grief. Feel sorry for yourself, because I die having fulfilled my sacred duties in light of eternal life. I made some changes in the slides this morning, so I kind of forgot how it went. But so he told this to the soldier, and because the soldier was feeling sorry that he had to kill him, right? So he has no fear, no fear. And this is also a stage that we want to achieve one day, a stage of consciousness where when we are fully aware of our own immortality and how fleeting this life is, there is nothing to be afraid of. Nothing that does not truly belong to us can be taken from us. Nothing. Nothing, not even our life. Because it does not, the life of the body does not belong to us. And so it is with this awareness and this peace that he dies. So he awakens in the spiritual realm. Rewinding the story, after he meets Jesus in the road of Damascus, we know that he becomes blind, right? And so he goes to Damascus. Jesus tells him to go, simply to go to Damascus, that he would get the answers that he needs. So he goes to Damascus, and he's in Damascus, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go. And a few days later, a man knocks on his door. And who was that man? Ananias, the man who he was going to kill. And Ananias tells him what? Dear brother, I am here. Jesus sent me here to open your eyes, so that now you can serve him. And so Ananias heals his eyes, and he sees again. So now he finds himself in a spiritual life blind again. He can't see. And so he hears a voice next to him. And who was that? The man speaks to him softly. One day Jesus asked me to restore your sight so that you could know the bitter way of his disciples. And today, Paul, he has granted me the blessing of opening your eyes for the contemplation of life eternal. Stand up. You have vanquished the final enemy. You have attained the crown of life. You have reached new realms of redemption. Behold now the beauty of life eternal, so that you may go meet the beloved Master. So when we say that happiness is not of this world, I think that's what we mean. We have glimpses. It's not that we cannot be happy. We can be happy to a certain extent here. But what we're working for, what is our aim, is this. Is to be able to awaken in the real life with this level of peace, with this level of light. This is the treasure that's awaiting for us. So a lot of times, that's where we're going to get our strength from. When everything is so bitter and it's so difficult, we have to think, I cannot experience happiness in this moment. I'm going through this difficult phase knowing that by going with integrity, with faith and with strength, I will achieve the kingdom of heaven. And he was so certain of that, that he had nothing to lose. He had only to gain. And so his eyes are open, and if you buy the book and read the story, you're going to be able to read the amazing end when Ananias asked him, and now, Brother Paul, what would you like to do? And so he's going to say what his wishes are, and the book will come to an end. So that's our talk for today.